I've never actually done this before, just trusting my screen, but I figured it was time to do so. So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Susan Stewart. Delighted to be here today to chair. I've chaired quite a few events here over the years. I used to be director of the Open University in Scotland. Now I'm no longer that, so I've got more time to read. And thanks to our sponsors, McCartney, I'm not seeing their logo. Ruth, can you help me? The law company? I will get that before the end. Anyway, delighted to be here to chair Sara Sheridan today. Reading Sara's biography is exhausting. She is a true Renaissance woman. Younger than me, she's got more than 20 books to her name, both fiction and non-fiction. She's a prolific writer, as well as novels, non-fiction books. She has penned film scripts, radio scripts, and the breadth and her depth of her interests and writing means that she's definitely someone you'd want to have on your pub quiz team, or to raise our sight somewhat. And recalling that Sally Magnuson kicked off today, you'd want her on Mastermind. She'd be excellent. You also, Sara, have a portrait in the National Portrait Gallery, and there aren't enough women, and we're delighted that Sara is one of them. And Sara, you also describe yourself as an activist, and I think that's probably just as important to you as being a writer. Is that correct?
I suppose a creative approach to change. I think it's something that creatives can really specialise in. Is all change comes from people changing their minds about things and opening their minds to things, and really that's the job of all art. And so I have a kind of dual job. I like to push the edges of what people are expecting, and then apart from that, it's really my job to keep you up at night. You know that feeling where you're reading a book and you're just like, oh, just do one more page, just one more chapter. I think if my books really work, that's what they're doing to you. So yeah. I'm giving everyone insomnia.
Yeah, they've certainly done that for me. And as I say, Sara's back catalogue is huge, so we don't have time to do everything today. So in consultation with Sara, we decided we would look at her wonderful non-fiction book, Where Are the Women?, as well as three novels, the most recent of which is on Starlight Seas, also The Fair Botanist, and also The Secrets of Blythewood Square, which I don't have here because I share a Kindle library with my partner, and she's got Blythewood Square and Kindle, so I have read it. But they're all available upstairs in the bookshop, and Sara will be available to sign books and take selfies, etc. So, Where Are the Women? This was first published in 2019, and I think it was a collaboration with Historic Environment Scotland, and it won several prizes at the time, now available in paperback. And it's part women's history that you almost certainly will not know, part reference book, and for me it's one that I dip into frequently. Whenever I'm venturing out to a town or a city I don't know well, so some of you will keep Pete Irvin's Scotland the Best in a handy place when you're about to venture out. I keep this beside it because its breadth, both geographically as well as historically. You commemorate over 1,200 women. So how did it come about?
I had written a short story for Bloody Scotland, which was published by Historic Environment Scotland, and the idea was they had 12 Historic Environment Scotland properties, and they got 12 writers to write short stories of murders set in these properties. And we did a tour when the book came out. We went to lots of these properties all over the place, and when I got back to Edinburgh, I phoned Jamie Crawford, who was the guy, at the time he was the map expert in Historic Environment Scotland. You probably all know him from BBC because he does Scotland from the Air. Mm-hmm. Jamie's one of those boys who's always up a tree or hanging out of a helicopter or whatever. And I said to him, I've been in lots of these properties and there is very little women's history. Where are the women? And I had a coffee with him and he got very nervous, got very twitchy. And he said, I'll have to see about this. And he sort of ran away. And I thought, oh, James.
I love when you do that.
Yeah. He's never gonna speak to me again. And then the next thing I knew, about a couple of weeks later, Jamie phoned me and he said, you know, you're right, I had to go and check. I didn't think you were right, but we're not really commemorating women in our properties. We really want to do something. And we met up, and at the time, in the New Yorker, there had been an article which was written by Rebecca Solnit, great American feminist writer, and she had remapped one of the lines on the New York subway. And then the line, in fact, had all these stations that were named after men. So she took those down, renamed each station after a woman, and told the history of New York through that story, through their stories. And it was Jamie's idea. He said, you should do that. And I immediately thought of the number 26 bus route in Edinburgh, or maybe the Clockwork Orange in Glasgow. But Jamie is much more ambitious than I am. And his next sentence was, you must do the whole country. And I remember thinking, oh shit, like, oh no, like this is huge. This is absolutely huge. And on the way home from the meeting, I mean, I said yes, obviously. On the way home from the meeting, I stopped at Waterstones and I got the giant map of Scotland, the biggest map I could get. And I took it home and I put it up in my study. And I just started to look at how I could possibly remap Scotland. And it's just there in the landscape. You know, we inbuild male history, but we don't build in female history in the same way. And so I took the old man of Hoy and it became an old woman of Hoy. And Fife stopped being a kingdom, it started being a queendom. And then I began to research, and really writing this book radicalized me, because I already was interested in female history and I was already an advocate for more diverse histories and telling our stories from lots of different points of view and what that brings to a story. But I hadn't realized how many stories we weren't telling about the women. And as I started to research, so when you get a book contract, the front page is, you know, the title, and then it says what you're supposed to do, and then it says how many words and how much money they're going to pay you, which is never enough. And Jamie had commissioned this book 3 days after we spoke, and it was to 55,000 words, which is sort of the average non-fiction book. And within a couple of weeks, I was phoning him up going, Jamie, I've found a whole load of women. Could I have another 5,000 words? And he'd say, oh, yeah, no problem. And then to phone again. And it took about 5 months to research and write. And by the end, I was phoning him up to try and get 85,000 words. And he said, we can't do that, Sara, because we have to go to print. You have to stop writing now. And when we went from hardback to paperback, you know, I'd found so many stories of amazing women and stories of, you know, people who had contributed to the society and the culture and the art and the history of where I come from in so many ways. So by the time I finished the book, writing the book, I was raging. I was really, really, really angry. And quite often when people read the book, they'll come up after events and they'll say, oh my God, I read your book. I'm so absolutely furious. Because you realise how many stories we aren't telling.
Yeah, I mean, I think I read somewhere when you wrote the book, and I can't imagine this has changed much. Across the UK, only 15% of our statues in the public realm are to women, and most of these are Queen Victoria. There are more statues to animals in Edinburgh than there are women, although I think we're about to get one of Muriel Spark eventually. But you created two great wee symbols in the book, the Museum of Misogyny symbols, and created new statues where none hitherto existed. And I mean, others,
it's caused mayhem.
Others you renamed and you gave them the suffragette symbols. So tell us, I mean, people younger and more irresponsible than me would probably want to get suffragette symbols and slap them on some of the dead white men that adorn our cities. But
I took everything down. I mean, I put up all different kinds of monuments. It's not only statues, which is a particularly kind of Victorian way of memorialising people, especially within cities. But I chose light shows and bells and festivals and lots of different ways to memorialise our female history. And yes, some of them are real. So London does the best in the UK. It's 6% of statues in London are to women. And on average over the UK, it's 3%. And in Edinburgh, it's not even 3% for a capital city. Edinburgh's performance is Shan.
Really?
It's really bad.
Of course, in Glasgow, George Square is being redeveloped. I'm not quite sure what the plans are. We've got Mary Barber in Govan, and we've got La Passionara down in Clydeside.
Yeah.
But I can't...
We've got a Victoria in George Square, but the other statues, they're keeping the men.
Are they keeping them?
They're keeping them. And some of them are rubbish as well. Some of them are men that didn't really do anything that was really worth memorialising. Yeah. And that's why I founded the Museum of Misogyny in Where Are the Women, which I put in Dundee instead of the V&A, and that was where to put all the terrible men.
Okay.
All the statues of all the terrible men were going to go into the Museum of Misogyny while they did studies on why this had happened and how to change it.
So as I said, the book won lots of prizes. It was very favourably received critically. Has anything changed? Has anyone said to you, right, I've got this commission to build this new building, hospital, arts centre, theatre, whatever. We would like to commemorate a woman from the area. Would you work with us? Who would you suggest? Have we got anything?
Yeah, lots. I mean, we had my office started to get calls from local councils saying, do you mind if we use some of these women that you've uncovered research for? I mean, because there's 1,200 women in the book, the entries are really quite short. But a lot of times, local councils want something, but they don't know who to commemorate. And so it sort of became a little bit of a research document. Probably the most high-profile one was Claire Mitchell and Zoe Ventatozzi, who founded the Accused Witches of Scotland campaign.
Oh, yes. She's a KC, Claire Mitchell,
She is. And they founded a best-selling, award-winning podcast, and they've now got a best-selling book as well, which is all about memorialising. They've started a tartan.
A witch's tartan, yeah.
Accused Witches of
Scotland. If anyone's looking for a Christmas present for me.
Yeah. It's pretty extraordinary. So Claire phoned me after the book came out, and I had done a number of monuments to the witches, and she was walking in Princess Street Garden in Edinburgh, and she said, I'm walking my dogs. Can I talk to you about this? I think we need a monument, and I think we need an apology. So that's been a huge campaign that's come from it as well. You must feel
incredibly proud of that.
I'm very proud of them. I mean, I think people often say, how do we change this? How do we change the issue that we've got? And the answer is very slowly and one thing at a time. And so it really takes people to take on one thing, whatever that one thing is, and see it through to fruition. And then talk a lot to young people. So when the book came out, I went a lot into schools and talked about, our amazing foremothers and how that history is just as important as the history that they know about, which is heteronormative and white and male and all of those things. And quite often they would wheel in the girls, and I would tell them about, the women in the place wherever they live. Sometimes they bring the wee boys as well. And when they bring the boys, it's always a cheeky wee bastard. Cheeky wee bastard down at the front, and he always puts up his hand, very proud of himself when it comes to questions. And he says, what's this got to do with me, miss? And I say to that wee boy, these are your grannies too.
Yeah.
You come from this just as much as we all come from our male history. And that really is the argument of almost everything I write at the moment. Let's look at a wider spectrum of where we come from.
Yeah.
Because we really, in schools and in general history, are only telling this one story. And it's not that we don't come from there, it's that just we come from all these other things as well. And I find that incredibly exciting, and I'm privileged to write about it.
I mean, you sparked so many campaigns. The new Scottish Parliament, when it was built 20-something years ago, one of its lovely features is that it had quotes and poetry on the outside of the walls. Not a single one by a woman. Yeah, and it was built and finally finished 2004, I think.
But there are now.
Yeah, there is, because of a campaign.
Yeah.
Which you were part of. There was a couple of anonymous, and they were probably women. Women never get the credit. But anyway, well done on that. So, highly recommend. And turning to your three, I think of the three of them together, Fair Botanicals, Secrets of Blythewood Square, and the most recent on Starlit Seas. In that, they all have women heroines who are doing jobs or have interests that are quite groundbreaking, unusual for women of the time. And it tends to be the Georgian and early Victorian time. And some of them, one of them, at least I know, was a real person. But how do you choose your characters generally for your historical series?
So it usually starts with a chat with an editor.
Right.
There's usually a drink taken. They know what they want.
Right.
So we have a chat about what I'm interested in, and then they tell me what they're interested in, and I try and come up with just a concept.
Right.
So with the Fair Botanists, I was in Contini's on George Street in Edinburgh. I used to go to Contini's when I lived in Edinburgh in the afternoon. I used to think of it as my office, and they have a very secret table up the back, which is behind a little screen, and they used to put me there every day, and I would sit there and write, and they would bring me cappuccinos. And I got a text from my agent, and my agent said, I've got an editor who's up from London. She's really interested in commissioning a book, a historical novel. Are you in town? We're in Contini's. So I was like wee meerkat off the top of this. Are they? And it's a big restaurant. They're on the other side of the restaurant. And I came over, and this woman was up from London, and she said, do you know anything about Scottish women's history? And I said, yeah. And I started to tell her about the women who had lived around the area that we're sitting in. We're on George Street, so there's the Assembly Rooms and Lady Charlotte Scott and Alison Coburn, who wrote The Flowers of the Forest but was a salonière, and Elizabeth Fulham, who was an early scientist who did a lot of development of photoreduction that ended up being what the art of photography was, the advances in photography were based on. And she thought, that's really interesting. She said, I want to commission a book set in a botanic garden in the 19th century. Do you think you can do that? Now, if an editor ever asks you this, you always say yes. Even if you've no interest in a botanic garden or whatever they ask for, you say, oh, yes, I think I could do that. And she said, what would you write about? And I said, well, I think women were involved in botanic gardens. I'd write about a botanical illustrator and a perfumer. And I would set it in Edinburgh in the early 1800s. The Botanic Garden moved from its position on Leith Walk up to Inverleith in the early 1820s. And in 1822, in the summer, George IV came. So I think I would set it maybe in the run-up to George IV arriving, because that's always the maddest time, the time of the preparations, everyone getting excited. I said, oh yeah, that sounds great. Write that down. So I wrote down on a scrap of paper, a paper napkin or something, these, perfume, movement of the Botanic Gardens, an illustrator, whatever I wrote down. You have these conversations sometimes with editors, and usually they don't come off. So I went off thinking, oh, that was fun. And my agent phoned me about 3 or 4 days later, and she said, that contract's come in. And I was like, oh, right. And at the top of the contract, she had written everything that I had written down on that bit of paper. And I was like, how am I going to fit all this in?
You do.
And I do. And I went to the Botanics Herbarium, the Botanics, they have a big archive there, and started to search through the archive, and it was just so rich, and nobody had mined it before. In the botanics, they're all botanists, so they're really interested in the flowers, but they're actually not really all that interested in the people, and so nobody had looked for those stories.
Aye.
And
so Elizabeth is your upper class woman who's recently widowed and moves back to Edinburgh to live with her late husband's auntie. And a somewhat unlikely friendship develops between Elizabeth and the other central character, who is called Belle Brodie. And I think the polite word for Belle's occupation, conscious it's the Sabbath, would be courtesan. So, the book is about perfume, and it is about plants, including the one that only flowers every 100 years and has a very obnoxious smell.
Yeah.
But it's also, not to put too fine a point on it, Sara, it's about sex and women's sex lives and hypocrisy. In 1822, I think it was said.
I mean, Edinburgh was known as a stewing pot, so they did in the late Georgian, they reckon about 20% of women in Edinburgh were involved somehow in the sex trade.
Oh.
And that's not even including Leith, which was the port.
Yeah, because the boundary was halfway down Leith Walk.
Yeah. So we don't think of Edinburgh. We think of Edinburgh as an Enlightenment city. Of course, it was an Enlightenment city. And we have all sorts of polite names for what was going on in Edinburgh. But there was a big sex trade there as well. And I really felt like nobody had written about that. Yeah. And there's this kind of late Georgian thing about courtesans where it's a sort of respected profession.
Yeah.
And these women make a very great deal of money doing what they do. And I just was really interested in how that fitted in with polite society in an Enlightenment city. And so I just started to write. I don't really plan. I'm not.
And where do you? So you get the concept. You've discussed it with your editor.
Yeah.
You get some characters and some broad themes. I mean, your books are so meticulously researched, which is why I'm saying, have you on the quiz team. But what comes first? The research, then more of the narrative and characterisation, or is it a parallel process? And how do you go about your research?
I'm very organic. I wish I could say, sometimes they ask you to go and talk to student writers, and they always want you to say, number one, get out a book and do this. Number two, do that. It's not really like that. I've read so much now, and sometimes it just comes into your mind, oh, this thing from ages ago, that's for this book. And for me, character and plot are very closely linked. Like, my characters couldn't do anything else other than what they do. If you've written the character right, they drive the story. And so occasionally I'm just, somebody just turns up. You're just like, where did you come from? It's a bit like that. And I think if I plan, it kind of dies on the page for me. And because it's my job to keep you up at night, I also have to feel that I don't know what's going to happen either, because what keeps you up at night is you not knowing what's going to happen. So I write it really not knowing what's going to happen next.
Okay, so to give you a wee flavour, for those of you who have not read any of Sara's books, she's going to read from On Starlit Seas. So Mariah Graham is a explorer and horticulturalist and social anthropologist. I think she's a
she's a real life. She's a real life character.
She's a real person.
And I discovered her in the John Murray Archive, which is in the National Library of Scotland. She was an author for the John Murray Publishing House in London. And she wrote essentially non-fiction. She wrote early travel guides, I suppose is what we think of them. Early travel guides are gas. Here's why. Today, if you get sort of commissioned by the Rough Guide, they tell you they want 3 pages on the weather and 10 pages on food and 8 pages on whatever. John Murray doesn't do that. He just says, find somebody who's been somewhere and says, write me what you think people need to know. My favourite one is an early guide to Burma, which was written by a guy who was brought up on a chicken farm in the Borders in Scotland. And he's just obsessed with chickens. And the whole way through this Burmese chicken guide, he's all like, these ones are really good layers, and this is how the Burmese chickens, what to do, and this kind of feather,
great
and
dinner
all this
party
kind of
companion.
Stuff. Yeah, honest to God, like this guy. So I imagine this book did not sell well. I'm just saying. But Mariah Graham was really good. Yeah, fairly niche. But Mariah was really good at what she did. And she researched very meticulously, and she was looking for economic openings a lot of the time as well. But she was also a mathematician. And when she was in Chile in the 1820s, saw an earthquake. And she figured out a formula to measure the earthquake. And this is a proto version of what we today call the Richter scale. So that was what was developed into the Richter scale later on. She arrived back in London and tried to present her theory at the Royal Society, and they wouldn't let her talk because she was a woman. But in the end, Charles Darwin stood up for her, and he presented her theory for her, and John Murray advocated for her, publisher advocated
John Murray sounded like a really enlightened, good guy for his time.
He is pretty good. There's 9 John Murrays. So it's a publishing house dynasty. So it's John Murray II that looks
the one who looked after Mariah.
And I am back at the moment writing about John Murray II and a very naughty little boy who is John Murray III.
Okay, so give us a bit from On Starlit Seas.
So this is from On Starlit Seas, and this is Mariah's family at home, they're very frustrated that she keeps going off on these voyages, and they think that she's gallivanting about the place, and they really want her to come back, but they can't make her. And so Mariah's aunt seeks out her publisher to see if she can get Mariah to come home, and this takes place in Piccadilly. John Murray The capital's most celebrated publisher crosses Piccadilly to visit his tailor on Jermyn Street. Mrs. Murray has suggested his waistcoat is old-fashioned, and he knows from experience that he must act timiously upon such a pronouncement. Something grey, sir. The colour of your hair would be more distinguished, she insists. Murray, friend and advisor to such notables as Lord Byron and Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, say nothing of the distinguished lady authors who place their literary work in his care, the sadly deceased Jane Austen, as well as the celebrated Mrs. Maria Graham, always takes his wife's advice in sartorial matters. The early summer fog is so thick today that even the sounds of horses' hooves are muffled, and a fellow would be lucky to recognise his own mother should he come across her. In these circumstances, how Lady Dundas, Maria's aunt, picks out Murray's figure in the gloom is a mystery. "Mr. Murray," her voice chimes, instantly so compelling that the publisher stands to attention as the venerable lady materialises next to him. Attired as always in the height of fashion, her outfit drips fox fur trim and seed pearls. Besides her stands Georgiana Graham, Maria's sister-in-law, and a doyenne of St. James's. "This is terribly fortunate," Lady Dundas drawls. "I was only saying to Miss Graham, we could expect you to have more news of Maria than we do. Do you know where on earth the girl is? I declare I can hardly keep up with her." Murray bows. "The last I heard, madam, she'd moved from her year's residence in Chile and was settled in Rio de Janeiro." Georgiana clutches the ribbons of her drawstring bag as tightly as she purses her lips. "Writing a book, no doubt." "I certainly hope so." "How very French," Miss Graham manages, with only the hint of a sneer. Murray draws up his shoulders. Maria is a friend and a favourite, as well as one of his stable of authors, while not entirely in favour of, as his wife puts it, those ghastly females who wish to vote. The publisher is certainly fair-minded about the fairer sex. Maria's decisions have not quite scandalised London, but almost. The attitude of her family hasn't helped, and he feels his blood rise as he stands up for her. "Your niece has the happy knack of confining commendable notices, and with a prose style that is a pleasure to read," he says smoothly. "She sent a few botanical sketches last year, which I passed on to Sir William Hooker recently at Kew. He was most impressed. She has a keen scientific intellect as well as a winning way with words. Mrs. Graham is a credit to you ladies, to your family, indeed, to your entire sex." Lady Dundas looks most discomfited by this news. "Maria is a widow, and we'd hoped she might come home," she says sadly. Miss Graham cuts in. "I've raised a memorial to my late brother. I visit it every day, and yet Maria, his wife, has not even seen it." "When she comes back, I'm sure she'll be delighted," Murray lies. "And when, sir, might that be?" Murray shrugs his shoulders. So many of his authors are abroad. The storerooms at the publisher's house on Albemarle Street are chock full of their correspondence. Byron insists on dispatching boxes of artefacts he's bought on his way across Europe, including several bulky paintings and curiosities. He has also deposited a shocking journal that Murray is holding. Although noble, the young man is sometimes beyond the pale. Mrs. Murray bemoans the space that such rigorous record-keeping requires. "We'll run out of storage for wine, sir," she insists, but Murray is adamant the correspondence must be preserved. "Even the notes of no consequence," Mrs. Murray pushes him, "those promising to visit soon or simply sending birthday wishes." Yes, yes, dear." Murray is immovable. "One never knows what may be later of interest. Papa always said." Mrs. Murray casts her eyes heavenwards. She's sure her son John will not take his father's system of administration so seriously, and she sees no reason why her husband should respect his own father's wishes. "Many of the correspondents from your father's day are deceased," she points out. "What use can their letters possibly be?" Murray wonders that in his absence his wife might rummage. He has left instructions with the household staff that should such an occurrence take place, they are to fetch him immediately and delay Mrs. Murray for as long as they can. The wily old publisher bows very low. "I expect Mrs. Graham will come home when she's ready, ladies. Grief takes us all differently, and Mrs. Graham has important work to do." Georgiana's lips let out a puff of air as if to blow the words Murray has uttered clean away. For women such as Lady Dundas and her protégée, there's only one way to behave. Maria, who in Murray's view shows absolute restraint, has edged beyond the cusp of her family's expectations. "Heaven knows what she'll get up to next," Lady Dundas, exasperated, takes her leave by bobbing a half-curtsy and clasping Miss Graham's arm. Murrenly fervently hopes what the girl will get up to will be some writing. London awaits, he bows and stands back to let the ladies pass. As they disappear into the fog, he sighs with relief. He doesn't envy Maria her position. Then, shrugging off the exchange, he continues towards St. James's Place and the comfortingly male preserve of his tailor.
Thank you. So, apart from the recurrent themes of the limitations of Georgian Victorian society on women, you know, expressing their full agency, you are concerned with class, you're concerned with racism and slavery, and often you use other characters apart from to draw out these issues. So in this book, Maria is in Brazil, and we've got the Brazilian War of Independence happening. One of the main exports from Brazil is chocolate. There's a lot of chocolate in this novel. If you're trying to not eat chocolate, don't read this novel. I scoffed chocolate while reading it, which was fine. And to get back to London, she takes a berth with a somewhat renegade sea captain, Captain James Henderson. And his story is that he, not to give too much away, but he has been raised for the first part of his childhood as a gentleman in London, through a variety of circumstances, ends up in Brazil, is now a smuggler, and as such can never hope to certainly have any fulfilled romantic inclinations towards a woman of Maria's class and station. So tell us a little bit about how you use other characters to draw out these nuances of class and the intersection basically of
yeah. So what I didn't realise I was doing this until someone else pointed it out to me, and then I was like, oh, that's genius. But I didn't kind of get what I was doing. So what I do is I pair up the characters. So I'll find a character that you already know. So for example, in The Fair Botanist, the Elizabeth character is a lady who's been widowed and she's fallen on hard times and she's gone to stay with her family, and she's very conventional, very conformist. And I put her next to Belle, who is an upper class hooker, who makes perfume on the side and is absolutely non-conformist and wild, really. And then by bringing them together, it shows both sides of that. And I do that with their maids. So Elizabeth has a maid called Margaret, who's a very round, sort of ginger-haired girl, and she's got freckles, and everyone in the house calls her Currant Bun, because that's who she is. And she's very conformist as well. She's the maid you've met before in Jane Austen, who's just delighted that the mistress has had a social success, and then Belle has a maid called Nellie Patterson, who's really out for herself. And she's got a whole secret life going on at the same time. And so if you pair up these people all the way through, and I do it in all of the books, you end up being able to look at both sides of what a particular role in society might be. And so I end up with, in The Fair Botanist or The Secrets of Blythewood Square, there's a really huge cast of characters to let you just dip into all these different things. And it's kind of a management job, really, almost, because as a reader, you have to be able to identify those characters really quickly. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to bring it off. And in the very early editions of The Fair Botanist, we had a cast list. But what we realised was readers were terrified. They would read this cast list and think, bloody hell, I'm never going to be able to follow this book. But then once they started to read it, they were fine. So we in the paperback, I don't think there is a cast list.
So can I just to probe that a little bit? On Starlit Seas was first published in 2016.
So it was an early.
And has been revised and republished. Tell me why and what's changed.
So with On Starlit Seas, it came out with a Scottish publisher who then got bought over by a big international publisher, and they decided what they really wanted to do more than anything else was crime, because that's what Scotland's known for, and it's not a crime book. So the book came out, the edition sold out, and they just shrugged their shoulders and said, well, we're not really interested in doing anything with it. And in those circumstances, you get the rights back. So I was at the drunken lunch for when the Secrets of Blythewood Square came out, and my editor wanted to commission more books, and she said, I want 3 books, and can you do the first one very quickly? And I said to her, well, I've got these rights for On Starlit Seas. It's exactly the same period as The Fair Botanist, and there is, in fact, quite by mistake, a link between the 2 books. Robert Graham, who is the head of the Botanic Garden in Edinburgh and the fair botanist, was Mariah Graham's first husband's cousin. So they knew each other.
Yeah.
And I said, I've got this book written, it's out, it's got reviews. I could just revise it, write a new historical note. That would be very quick and you can have it immediately. And so she bought 3 books.
Great.
And the first one was on Starlit Seas and it came back into print, which was just very
Brilliant.
lucky.
So that on Starlit Seas, primarily set in London, Fair Botanist, primarily Edinburgh, Blythewood Square, Glasgow. And of course, you are someone who moved from Edinburgh to Glasgow.
I did.
I'm so tempted to ask which one's best.
I mean, obviously Glasgow.
Okay, fine.
We don't say that. We don't say that on the East Coast.
In the Secrets of Blythewood Square, one of the themes again, as in on Starlit Seas, is slavery and Britain's role in the slave trade, and specifically Scotland's role in the slave trade. And sometimes in Scotland, I think we can be a little bit complacent on that, although in more recent years, certainly University of Glasgow have done a lot of examination and repatriations. Edinburgh as a city, the late Dr. Jeff Palmer, Professor Jeff Palmer. In Blythewood Square, Frederick Douglass makes an appearance, 1834?
1846.
And you had get one of these dates wrong.
Close.
He did actually come to Glasgow, the great emancipator, Frederick Douglass. And it's obviously a concern of yours. And at the fair, at the end of On Starlit Seas, you have a sensitivity statement.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've sometimes thought, sensitivity statements for those of us that read, you know, Dickens and all the classics where horrible things happen to nice people all the time. But I learned something from your sensitivity statement, which is great. I like a book that, you know, educates me as well as entertains me. So tell me about the sensitivity statement, re-slave and slavery, and the role of your work in helping Scotland. I don't want to be too grandiose about this, but allowing people in Scotland to come to that part of our history in a different way, through a different lens.
So yeah, when that cheeky wee bastard boy who says that it's not our, you know, what's it got to do with me? I think as white people, very often we say, well, the enslavement's nothing to do with us. That's black history. But of course, who was doing the enslaving, right? It was us. And it was our forebears. So it's very much part of our history. And I set Secrets of Blythewood Square in 1846 because in 1845 and 1846, Frederick Douglass did come and he did do talks all over Scotland. And in fact, picked a stooshy with the Free Kirk. So the Free Kirk had just been set up in 1843 and they had accepted money from plantation owners to build their own churches. And Douglas started a campaign called the Send Back the Money. And the Quakers fell in behind it and it divided the Church of Scotland. It shattered the Free Kirk. And it, you know, he just shook it up.
Aye.
And we don't have a picture of him.
No, it's not just women who aren't represented.
Yes.
There are no statues or any commemorations of Frederick Douglass in Glasgow, and he did so much work there. The abolitionist movement really grew up.
Not in Glasgow. There's a mural in Edinburgh, where he stayed in Edinburgh, and he did travel around quite a bit. And he is America's most photographed man of the 19th century. He used photographs right throughout his career, and the Secrets of Blythewood Square is set around photography studios in this exciting new medium of photography. And all the things that it can do, including taking erotic photographs, which is of course all about female body and all of that. And so the big photographers of the day were David Octavius Hill and Robert Adamson, who had a studio in Edinburgh at Rock House on Carlton Hill. And they developed photography from there. They were the most famous Scottish photographers of the era. But they had a deal with the Free Kirk. And they photographed all the Free Kirk's ministers, and David Octavius Hill was doing a painting. And so when Frederick Douglass arrived in Edinburgh and started talking about this campaign, they didn't want to sort of, you know, blot their copybook by taking a photograph of this guy who was causing trouble, as they would have seen it. And so there's a really interesting story there around creatives having the authenticity of their beliefs and who gets bought off and who doesn't. And for me, the most interesting thing about creative life is who is conformist and who isn't. You know, just because you're creative, it doesn't make you wild and free. You can be conformist, very, very conformist, or you can be somebody who is non-conformist and works, you know, to your own tune.
Or you can start off one way and end up the other.
Listen, it's an open book. It's a rainbow, is a spectrum. So that was really interesting to me with David Octavius Hill and Robert Adamson. And so I was really interested in setting it in 1846 in Glasgow, which is a much more religious city than Edinburgh. Edinburgh is founded on the aristocracy. That's what all the Fair Botanist is about. It's about defence. It's about the castle. That's what Edinburgh is about. Glasgow comes from the kirk. It comes from the cathedral. And it's a city today that even today, you know, when I moved from Glasgow to Edinburgh to Glasgow, I realised that in Edinburgh, when someone asks you what school you went to, they want to try and figure out whether you went to a private school. In Glasgow, they're not trying to figure that out when they ask you what school you went to, right?
No.
So it's really all about the church and what your belief is.
So that, I mean, Blythe was got a fascinating book, but as Sara says, photography, two women characters again, one an upper middle class woman who's an heiress, who discovers that her father's fortune, which she has inherited, may have hidden a seedier side to her character. To his character rather, and Ellery Mann, who's a working class woman who's newly moved to Glasgow and trying to become established by setting up her own studio. And, you know, you've also got emancipation and slavery, the schism in the kirk between the free kirks. Interesting, you said that Glasgow's a religious city and Edinburgh is not. To the contemporary reader, they might think, because the assembly takes place in Edinburgh, etc., that the converse was true. Although if you look at the time that our universities were founded in Scotland, it was St Andrews, then Glasgow, then Aberdeen, and graduates at Edinburgh, I hate you saying this, but they were comparatively late, really. They were 15-something. And I guess that was because the church was not quite as dominant. But I wanted to ask about the place of religion in your novels about Georgian and Victorian times, because it was an interesting time.
It was. I mean, the Enlightenment, David Hume was famously known as the first atheist. So you get this group of people who are not, you know, the medieval is so conformist, everybody goes to church. That sort of changes in the Georgian and the early Victorian, and I love that shift. And so that's really one of the reasons that I'm interested in writing about that period. And also there's a madness in, you know, once you get into those extreme, you know, religious views, there's a kind of madness in it, where you want, you know, you're having a huge, massive argument where you want to kill somebody over a tiny bit of theological, you know, so really, really small details, and people get into these really big arguments. And so for a novelist, that's a really interesting examination of what belief is, and why do you believe, and why can't you accept that somebody else has a different belief than you do. So we talk quite a lot about modern politics being divisive, and like that, just if you've read any of these historical documents, you know, that pertain to this kind of stuff, you just think that's hilarious, because it's always divisive. People are always arguing about things. The argument is life. The argument is change. And so I'm really interested in that. And also there's comedy in it. You know, people do mad things because they really believe something. So there's a great kind of comic part of the books as well. I like to think that telling happy stories in Scotland and of Scotland is a radical act, because we are very keen on the crimes, right? We're very keen on the stabbings and the shootings and the horrible, terrible forensic crimes, right? And we're very keen on the misery. We love the misery.
And even our religion is personified by Reverend I.M. Jolly.
Yeah.
Our religion is miserable.
Yes, it is miserable. And there's a lot of books, particularly about Glasgow, actually, about how poor everybody is and how miserable everybody is and how, you know, and there is deprivation in our history in Glasgow. I don't want to say that there isn't, but it was also one of the richest cities in the world for a long time.
Built on slavery.
And built on enslavement and built on trade as well, and also on the Enlightenment. So Edinburgh's nabbed the Enlightenment title, but actually Glasgow was an Enlightenment city really as well. And so I like to feel there's a radical act there in telling funny stories and stories about us being rich, stories about Scottish people being clever, stories about people finding a way through when the odds are against them, which essentially is stories about hope. And there are a lot of stories we tell ourselves which are miserable about, for example, the clearance of the Highlands. And certainly this is, you know, I'm not saying this was a happy event.
It wasn't a barrel of laughs.
It wasn't a barrel of laughs. But some people who came out from the Gaeltacht weren't miserable that they had left.
Yeah.
Right. The classic Highlander in any Scottish book misses the croft and just wants to go back and doesn't, you know, isn't enjoying themselves at all. And I wanted to create characters who left and were really successful and who were quite glad that they didn't have to go back to the croft because maybe they just didn't fit in there.
I want to create time for the audience to come in, but I just want to ask you 2 questions before I bring other people in. The photography is central to the secrets of Blythswood Square, and of course photography traditionally has been a double-edged sword for women, where we've been more object than subject. Were you wanting to examine the male gaze and the female gaze in this novel, and is there such a thing as a female aesthetic per se?
I think definitely. I mean, Ellery Mann is partly comes from Jessie Mann, who was a real life character. Jessie appears in the book as the assistant of David Octavius Hill and Robert Adamson in the studio that they had. And she's kind of the naughty cousin. I've made her up. She's fictional. But she's also based on a Glasgow photographer called May Borthwick, who set up her very first studio that I think in Scotland was set up by a woman at the bottom of Buchanan Street in about 1850. And this is what Ellery does in 1846 in the book. And she deals with people in a different way. I don't know how many people in the audience regularly get their photograph taken. I regularly get my photograph taken. It's the guys saying, "Lean forward, love." You know, it's not the girls saying that. So there is a very different aesthetic and how you view people and how you want your body to be viewed and how much you allow models to display themselves, if you like, so to express who they are through the way that they look. And so all of that could be explored in the photography studio in great fun ways. And Ellery, of course, discovers she can sort of take some quite racy pictures. And she works very well with those women. I mean, by racy pictures, I don't know how to tell you this, but some of these women are showing their ankles. This is 1846, that's racy. Yeah. So if you show your ankle, you show a little bit of petticoat, it's like, calm down. So there's a lot of that's going on, that looking at like, what is the edge of what you're allowed to show of your own body and what is sexy and what isn't sexy. Yeah. You know, breasts are not considered particularly sexy in the late Georgian. Ankles, however, you know, so that's really interesting to us today because we don't feel that way about it. You know, life changes and perceptions of bodies change. So all of that's really interesting, and to approach that in a story way and have fun with it was really... Yeah,
there are a lot of giggles in these books. Perhaps I wouldn't want to leave the impression that they're all about, you know, people buying other people and how miserable things were for women. Yeah, all these things are true, but there are a lot of laughs in it too. Before I come to the audience, what can we look forward to next, Sara? What are you working on, or what's coming out? Or
so next May, I have a book out called The Jewel Keepers, which is about a lost Scottish crown. And we're back in Edinburgh in 1837, just on the cusp of the Victorian era, with the Mackenzie women, who were ladies in waiting to Mary, Queen of Scots, were given a crown to hide because the English were coming, and they've never given it back.
Right.
And so they are the jewel keepers to the Scottish crown. And I won't say any more about that, but it's kind of a treasure hunt.
And really. That comes out?
May. That'll be out in May. And then I'm working at the moment actually on a follow-up to The Fair Botanists, where Belle Brodie, at the end of The Fair Botanists, heads off to London. And so it's kind of what Belle Brodie did next. And she, you know, she's not become more upright, I'm afraid. She's become even less upright.
I loved Belle. You know, to choose between the two of them who you'd like to have dinner with, it would be Belle.
Belle Brodie. She'd be
she's certainly more fun. Yeah.
Well, in 1824, John Murray, who I did the reading about, the second John Murray, was one of the trustees of Byron's estate after Byron died. And Byron had written this shocking memoir, and he and the other executors burned it in the fireplace of his house in Albemarle Street because it was considered too shocking. But luckily, in my book, Belle Brodie has made it a copy. And so they hear about this and they all start to pursue her and she heads off. So that'll be happening. The Jewel Keepers is first and then it's called The Counterfeit and the Courtesan.
Good. So it's your turn now.
Oh.
So coming to...
These people are exhausted. You are the diehards of the Cove and Kilcreggan Book Festival.
Once we've made it to the last session.
Yeah. Has anyone got a question? Look, you're exhausted.
Shy.
Oh, there we go.
Thank you. What did I press?
Just nothing.
Thanks so much for that kind of race through your books. I was really fascinated by your pairing up of characters. And I had a wee worry about, oh God, it's Virgin and Whore. And then, but you really cleared that up for me, so thank you. If we were projecting ourselves 100 years forward and you were writing about the history of now, what two women characters would you pair up?
Oh, that's
good question.
I have never been asked that question before. Thank you, madam.
It's a cracker.
That is an absolute crack. Well, they have to disagree. They have to disagree about something absolutely fundamental. So it's going to be a trans woman and a gender critical woman who agree about something else. So maybe they're both nationalists, maybe they're both Scottish nationalists. So they've got this thing they agree about, but this thing they disagree about. And I mean, that would be quite good fun. But you can't write that in the middle of it. It's very difficult to write that in the middle of it, because you have to write that with hindsight. You've got to write that with hindsight.
Okay, that's one. That's one.
Yeah.
What about, here's one.
Go.
Because they did know each other and they both had a role to play in the Open University's history.
Oh.
And they were very, very different. And in the early days of the Open University, they were both on campus and the Vice-Chancellor was keeping them apart. The late great, I'm not going to say that about one and not the other, Jenny Lee
Yeah, love Jenny Lee.
and Margaret Thatcher.
Jenny Lee and Margaret Thatcher would be great, but that's not today.
No, that's not.
Your question was for today, isn't it?
Okay.
And things have
That's
changed.
why you're a writer.
Things have changed a lot since Jenny Lee and Margaret Thatcher. Although, like, it's a boxing match I would like to see.
Yeah. Other questions?
I mean, we're not going to top that one.
No, that's a crack.
But let's give it a shot.
Sara, thank you very much. I really enjoyed The Fair Botanist. I really loved it. I don't know if you're aware of the statues that have been put in Belfast City Council's grounds, the first two women.
No, who are they?
Well, and I'm wondering whether your book had that influence. One is Mary Joy McCracken, who was born in 1771, died in 1860 or something, and she's founded the Belfast Ladies Society for Anti-Slavery. And Belfast, I have to say, is the only city in the UK that wouldn't let any ship connected to slavery dock.
Amazing.
And she used to go down to the quayside every day to make sure that didn't happen. And the other one is a trade unionist from, I think, the early 1900s. I don't know her name. But I'm wondering whether, are you aware of that? Because your book may have actually influenced the City Council to do that.
I don't know. I think it has got a slightly wider, it's not just Scotland, like it has been read in other places, and I do sometimes get inquiries from other people. And I have started an outline for a book which will be called London's Lost Women. And it's about 100 monuments that ought to be in London that aren't in London to women's history. But nobody's commissioned that yet. It's just I'm busy writing what's commissioned, and then next year
That'd be a good one.
But I think London's Lost Women is a really interesting book. I was on the radio. They're putting up a Queen Elizabeth monument, and they've put aside something, I've forgotten the figure, but something crazy like 26 million quid to do this monument. And they had me on with a guy who was saying, oh yes, we'll do something wonderful in a park. And I was like, put up a monument to a woman from Elizabeth's reign at every tube station on the Elizabeth line.
Yeah.
Do that. And he was outraged and thought this was a rubbish monument. But that's what we need, because that 6% is too low. And the reason it's important, I think of myself as a kid walking along George Street in Edinburgh. We used to go into Edinburgh every Saturday, and I've got two younger brothers, and they walked along George Street seeing guys up on plinths, and they knew they could be a doctor, they knew they could be a physicist, they knew they could be a teacher, they knew they could be those things because it was all around them. It's in the built environment. And there's not a single statue for me to look at on that walk. And I think of the difference that would have made to me as a young woman, that you see that you can be. And that's why this is important.
Yeah, you can't be what you can't see. That's
Yeah,
the old activist slogan.
or it's more difficult to be what you can't see. You've got to be able to see it. And so it's something that, I mean, I was in Edinburgh on Friday looking at a stolperstein, which is a stumbling stone. So these are all over Berlin. They've put down stolperstein in the pavement to people who died in Nazi concentration camps.
Yeah.
And we've put the first one down in Edinburgh, and it's outside St Stephen's Church, and it's to Jane Haining, who ran an orphanage for Jewish kids and went back to run that orphanage when she knew there was going to be trouble. She knew the war was going to happen. She died in Auschwitz. I think she's the only Scot in Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Memorial Monument. And there's now a stolperstein outside St Stephen's Church in Edinburgh. It's tiny, just a little brass plate.
It's supposed to make you stop and think. It's a wonderful concept.
Yeah, it's a really good concept. So it doesn't have to be a statue, but there has to be more of it.
We're running out of time. I could take one quick one. I've got one, like fantasy dinner party.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Jenny Lee would be at mine, but
Jenny Lee would be great.
You know so much about so many women from Scottish history. So which ones would be around your dinner table?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so Lorna Moon was from Strichen in Aberdeenshire. She wrote a book called Doorways in Dromarty, which is a set of the best short stories I've ever read. They're fabulous. And she basically wrote about people in Strichen. And it was banned from Strichen Library when it came out because she'd taken the mick a bit. Anyway, she left Strichen, she went to Canada and then latterly to Hollywood, where she became a screenwriter.
Oh, wow.
And she was great friends with Mary Pickford. She had an affair with Cecil B. DeMille's brother, and she had a son with him, an illegitimate son with him, called Richard DeMille. And I would definitely like Lorna at my dinner table. She's a very, very talented writer. The way that she deals with increments is in little changes. Somebody will just change their hat or sit down on a chair and the world changes. She's just really, really good at that. So I would definitely want Lorna Moon there. I'd love Jane Haining to be there.
Yes.
I'd love to. She's a one of these kind of, she's almost saintly. You're like, I would love to talk to Jane Haining. I would love to talk to Jessie Mann and get all the scuttlebutt on Rock House. With David Octavius Hill, because the story is that David Octavius Hill and Robert Adamson took all those thousands of photographs. But among those thousands of photographs, there are photographs of David Octavius Hill and Robert Adamson. So I think Jessie Mann was taking some photographs. And there's certainly some evidence that she was taking
never getting the credit.
And never getting the credit and doing all the processing of the photographic materials and the prints. So yeah, I think that would be a good start. I think.
Okay,
but we're not short of amazing form.
I don't mind serving the soup or whatever.
You're in.
Just eavesdropping on that dinner party. I think that'd be great. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you'd like to join me in thanking Sara very much.
Thank you.
You did well.
Thank you.